So thanks to the generous grant from the National Park Service American Battlefield Protection Program, the Ridgefield Historical Society has again hired heritage consultants for the second phase of our Battle of Ridgefield archaeology project. This phase begins today with this presentation and aims to develop a more inclusive and comprehensive interpretation of the battle, define the battlefield's boundaries, evaluate the battlefield's archaeological integrity, and assess its eligibility for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. So what an incredible time to be alive here. 248 years after the battle, this project represents a rare, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity made possible by the unique alignment of funding, cutting-edge technology, leadership from the Historical Society, and the expertise of Connecticut's top archaeologists. As we approach the 250th anniversary of America's founding in 2026 and the Battle of Ridgefield in 2027, this project is a powerful way to honor and rediscover our shared past. The success of this project depends on you, Ridgefield landowners, allowing our archaeologists to access your property. We have permission forms on the registration table at the back of the room. Please consider filling one out tonight. Your participation in our project will make a real difference. I'm honored to introduce Dr. David Naumec. He is a historian, archaeologist, and museum consultant. He is an archaeology field director for Heritage Consultants and is Historic New England's Revolution 250 research scholar, studying New England's indigenous and African-American Revolutionary War veterans. Dr. Naumec is a graduate of the University of Connecticut, holds a master's degree in history and museum studies from Tufts University, and a PhD in race and ethnicity in early America through the Civil War from Clark University. Please join me in giving Dr. Naumec a warm welcome to Ridgefield.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hopefully just project my voice and also work between a microphone here. It looks like this one as well. Okay. And thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure. Again, thank you for the Ridgefield Historical Society, for pursuing this phenomenal research project long term. Thank you for the people of Ridgefield for being so supportive. We'll be talking more about how much this battle spans across various sections of town here. And thank you for the church for hosting us. This is a great space. So in any case, Kevin McBride sends his regards, the other primary investigator in this project out of the University of Connecticut. He's off on a conference this weekend, but he's been critically involved with the project since day one. So here we are. You'll see us in town. And I guess we'll just get into it and let you know what we've been doing in the past, what to expect this time around, and of course, the questions, the mysteries that we still have that we hope to address to perhaps answer, get close to some answers during this research phase. So in any case, I'll just sort of move ahead here and see how it all works out. For those of you that have been very much involved in your local town history, much of this might be review. But I'm making no assumptions, as actually my last slide kind of states, make no assumptions when it comes to this battlefield research. I'm assuming we're all kind of on a basic knowledge of the Revolution and perhaps the engagements that happened in this town from the signage and just from growing up around here. But in any case, the American Battlefield Protection Program, fantastic National Park Service-based program, which is actually unique in the National Park Service structure. It's been congressionally sort of mandated. It has congressional line item funding. Thus far, it's missed a lot of these machete hatchet kind of funding cuts that have been going on in our federal government, but who knows? We are good through 2025, 2026. Hopefully the program continues on further because it is such a great tool to address threatened battlefield sites across the United States. It was developed to protect Civil War and Revolutionary War battlefields threatened originally in the South in Virginia. Some of you might be familiar with the infamous perhaps, Disneyland kind of Manassas battlefield park that Disneyland was going to put up on our first battlefield of the Civil War. And out of that threat came a lot of this sort of work and research you see today. So it's meant to raise the visibility of threatened sites, to get the community more involved in basically maintaining these sites and just being aware of their local town history, and also to bring these locally known events to a national kind of spotlight. Not as many people as you think are familiar with this Battle of Ridgefield, which is so important, I feel, to the overall history of the war. So in any case, there's been several of these Connecticut-based ABPP projects. Myself and Dr. McBride have really been involved in, I think, almost all of them, maybe give or take one or two. They originally were grants to study very early colonial war, sort of conflicts, the Pequot War, or the first real engagements here in the Northeast between the English and Native Americans. King Philip's War, War of 1812, we worked on several sites, and we've been working for almost 15 years now to build up to this point for our first real, primetime Revolutionary War large battlefield engagement. This thing's huge. It's several miles, like 7, 8 miles going through town, thousands of combatants, thousands of artifacts are going to be out there, so it's going to be full of surprises. So Ridgefield is probably the first one of these Revolutionary War projects pursued, at least in Connecticut, so this is pretty exciting. And what a place to do it, right? No better place than Ridgefield. There was a chance once to, Groton was attempting to study their Battle of Griswold, Fort Griswold and Groton Heights, but they never kind of followed through. Ridgefield beat them to it, but here we are. I mean, these events of April 27th, this battle, day-long event, basically impacted local, state, national history without a doubt. It's been the subject of historians, antiquarians, professional historians, amateur historians, artists for years. You have seen all the signage around town, the different forms of commemoration that are taking place in this town too. It's hard to not know about this history, I suppose, if you've lived here for a few years. Reenactments, right? And historical preservation, which this is part of. You are involved in this tonight, without a doubt. I was here for the 245th reenactment, and it was pretty impressive. So with that said, the archaeological discoveries in town of human remains that are associated with the battle, that's still to be determined. One of the biggest mysteries, I guess, of the project thus far, of who those individuals were. British forces, American forces, largely. Who are they? We're still trying to figure that out. And with renewed public interest in America 250 coming up, again, perfect time, perfect position to move forward on this research. So with that said, I might have the dates off slightly, but Ridgefield Historical, I think in 2020, pursued the first round of funding. We may have wrapped that up in 2022, if I have it correct. And then again, 2024 was the second round of funding. The research done the first phase proved to the Park Service that there was quite a bit of potential for finding battle-related objects and to learn more about the battle. If our first phase of research determined everything was destroyed, impacted, everything's paved over, they would have never funded a phase 2, especially to this extent. But Ridgefield presented such a great case that they were happy to fund it. So there's Nick Bellantoni, the state archaeologist from a few years ago. Current state archaeologist is Sarah Sportsman. And I don't think that's the actual site because it was kind of in the basement of a house for the most part. But here's a sketch of a couple of the human remains that were found, just the way they were laid out. Some buttons found on them which do not assist that much in identification. So that, I mean, God, when you find human remains involved with the battle, that pretty much excites all sorts of interest. So with that said, as we mentioned, the 245th, many of you experienced that. It was one very interesting anniversary. I was so happy to be a part of it, to experience most of it. And I can only imagine what's going to be coming up in a few years from now. And you'll have the survey completed by then. We should know so much more about the battlefield and the room that we'll have for future interpretation, knowledge, research. It'll be incredible. So I kind of already touched on this, no sense to go on it for too long, but what did we do in phase one? Tried to dig out all sorts of primary source info. A lot of it's been dug up by other historians and researchers in town over the years, but what else could we find? Material from the period that was, the battle took place, right? We had some great success digging through pension records, a lot of local town records. Actually, right here in the town hall sat some great local maps, which provided a great deal of context that we were looking for. All the early road surveys, trying to identify houses that were standing at the time or destroyed during the battle. All this sort of stuff is like laying the groundwork for what we're doing now. Locating battlefield artifacts, monuments, signage. There has been artifacts found in town, and even recently in the past few weeks and months even, right? We're lucky enough to have one of our staff members at Heritage that has family members that lived in town, had family property, and had done some work in his time and found Loyalist buttons, American buttons, British buttons, lead shot that was impacted and dropped, like just a small sampling of the sort of stuff we anticipate on finding along the battlefield route. So with that said, we were trying to figure out for the Park Service a battlefield boundary. Yeah, there's markers in town. People out, probably everybody here can point to first, second, third engagement kind of areas, but what are the extent of the fighting? What was the ebb and flow of troop movements? How wide or far are we going to find artifacts? These battlefields are always far more complicated than any of the historical records indicate. It's just, I guess, the nature of record keeping then. We're trying to figure out our proposed core areas where some of the most intensive actions took place that we could reconstruct. Contributing properties might be where troops are coming or going from, or might, in camp or places like that. Fighting might not have taken place there, but say the British encampment on the southern end of town, that's a very important contributing property, right? So the National Park Service really wants to study and fund areas where combat took place, blood was shed, and kind of stuff. But in any case, we gave them a lot to think about. Landholder permission, as Stephen said, I've been looking at a landholder database of all the permission forms that were signed in 21, 22. We were hoping to get a critical mass to then show the Park Service there's landholder buy-in. The town is supportive, there's stakeholders that are going to let us on their property. I think there's something like 70 some odd people that signed up already in 2021, 22. Great. If any of you are in the room, I'll probably be calling you or emailing you, or come talk to me again so we can just touch base again. We're trying to figure out a schedule on where to survey in town and when, right? But landholder permission is critical. We're dealing with hundreds, definitely hundreds, of individual landholder properties. All of you, are potentially in the battlefield site. You might see myself, Kevin, or a representative that will have from the Historical Society or Heritage that has an actual permission form asking you for permission to let us on your property to survey for evidence of the battlefield. And we'll talk more about that in the end, how that works out. If people are coming and knocking on your door that aren't from Heritage or Historical Society and do not have permission forms, I think at this time of the study, you should probably just politely ask them to go on and wait for us, because this is your town's historical heritage you're talking about. Hopefully all these artifacts come together. They'll all be held at the Historical Society, and I'm sure exhibited at a later date somewhere in town here. It's going to be great. So anyway, we're back at landholder permissions. We have 70 some odd, and we need probably like 300 more. So we're going to be out there knocking on doors. You might get mailings as well. So if you get a mailing from Ridgefield or Heritage, don't throw it away immediately. It's not a bill, it is a request, though. It'll be a landholder packet. So then we compiled all this in the final technical report, a copy of which is available at the Ridgefield Historical Society. The maps you'll see today are from this report. I forget how large it was, but it was quite a volume, talking about every aspect of the research that we could do and trying to kind of game out where these battlefield locations would be. Another interesting aspect of the grant that was written specifically into phase 1 and phase 2 is to study, get as historically accurate as we can about American and British forces. As we know, it's a pretty diverse landscape out there, and armed forces always reflect the societies they're drawn from. Probably easily, from my research, at least 10%. I would go as high as 15%. As most Connecticut troops had 10 to 15% of their soldiers were African American, Native American. It kind of got higher as the war went on. So at this point in the war, we were wondering how many people we could track down. The nature of record keeping is kind of spotty. As you'll see later on, we can pretty much, it has been identified even before we started research, the different U.S. regiments, Connecticut regiments that were there. But how many people responded? It wasn't 100% of these companies. It's really hard to reconstruct the rosters, as some of the other authors that have worked on this study have come across over the years. But anyway, we cast a wide net. Long story short, for the methodology here, if anybody's familiar with like the most famous Revolutionary War kind of account of a private soldier, it's Joseph Plomartin. And Joseph Plomartin was from various Connecticut regiments. He was from Milford. And turns out Plomartin was also here at the Battle of Ridgefield. Turns out he had re-enlisted in the Continental Army. He was home on leave for like 3 or 4 months. But with the British invaded, all of these guys on leave, Continentals, were told to fall in with the closest militia company in your town. So we really don't know how many Continental soldiers were here, because they were also mixed in among various town militias. Using that methodology, went page by page to the rosters looking for anybody enlisting at the time of Martin, and like, I forget, it was January or February or something like that. And lo and behold, we found, some notes. Enlisted May 2nd, but deserts to the enemy April 27th. Killed in action. Actually, I have the date is a day off there. No, it's correct. It's Danbury. So we got a handful of people in notes, but at least 20 to 30 additional Native and African American soldiers that could have been there, kind of thing. So we're trying to reconstruct American forces as much as possible. It's a difficult task, but it's worthwhile exercise. And what I'll do now is walk through really basically, but with some good historical primary sources that I can read out to you if you can't read them. Some of the text here is pretty small because it's just to demonstrate how complicated things are. In any case, I think this presentation will be available later, probably at Ridgefield. But this is a 3-day campaign, basically. The British under General Tryon, basically New York's colonial governor before the war, now promoted to general, had a plan to invade Western Connecticut and to attack and target and attack the Continental military stores that are being positioned at Danbury. Danbury centrally located, not too far from the Hudson. It's an intersection of major roads. It's a huge military depot. And the British have been attacking and landing and attacking in other areas of the Hudson. But Tryon thought this would be a worthwhile assault because he was hoping to rely on loyalist sentiment, Tories, pro-royal citizens in Western Connecticut. There was a large population of either anti-war, people in this way, or pro-royal individuals, Tory loyalists. So Tryon thought perhaps he would get a lot of local support. Maybe he'd get additional enlistments. He sort of miscalculated, but he wasn't mistaken in considering the sentiments of Western Connecticut. The takeaway here is there was a number of militia regiments from the 4th Brigade Connecticut Militia that deployed. Some Continentals, we don't know troop strength because people are from Continental units are mixed in with militia units, but and it varies throughout the day too. But at least at the beginning of our Battle of Ridgefield, there's probably about 800 American troops massed at Bethel. We'll talk about that split into 2 divisions. But the unknown is the amount of men that are massing around Danbury. The unknown is the New York troops that I almost consider kind of the unsung hero of this battle too. The 2nd and 3rd Westchester. There's supposedly elements of the 7th Dutchess County, New York as well. Militia right across the line here. A couple of quick routes of approach here on the North Salem Road and the other road down south here. So they were on scene as well, and we'll talk more about them. So, I mean, it could be up to 1,000 troops, who knows? We're still trying to mic it out, but from all, we try to be as conservative as possible. We'll talk about troops. When it comes to the British, they had about 2,000 on the ground, and they handpicked, I think it was about 150 men from various regiments, probably their best troops, their light infantry, their grenadiers kind of stuff. They basically split into 2 big brigades of about 750 each. 3 cannons deployed to each brigade. They're these 4-pound guns. You can see a projectile lobbed in Keeler Tavern over there. And I think, I forget, each of the gun crew was something like 9 to 12 gunners as well. So there was, plus caissons, we figured there was like another 80 some odd men just with the artillery alone. And there was a very small group of dragoons, mounted troops, basically scouting and working the flanks kind of thing. So there was enough British to be an imposing force. And again, with Tryon thinking there'd be a good amount of loyalist support, they didn't expect much resistance, but I'm sure they were hoping to have a pitched battle with American forces. So in any case, and all these details are also laid out pretty well in Keith Jones's book, Battle of Ridgefield, the new version that's actually for sale behind you. I definitely encourage you to check it out someday. So our story begins, and I might as well back up a bit and just give it its just due, but April 25th, the British land in Campo Beach down in present-day Westport. You'll see the black arrows. They'll march up, basically, up towards Reading and through Bethel to reach Danbury. The Americans, for hours, really didn't know what the British target was. The initial fear was it was going to be Fairfield itself. So American forces are massing there, and when they realize that the British are marching north, they give chase. The British are already some odd miles ahead of them. And the Americans, they don't have enough troops to even put up a good fight against 2,000 British at this point. Every time a 20-man company would come into Fairfield, they would get deployed up north, just march north, link up with Worcester. So everyone's following the British as they are marching on Danbury. They get to Danbury pretty early, or in the afternoon, I should say, about noontime on the 25th, and basically fan out and start looking for military stores. They're met with brief resistance. Anytime the British take any sort of gunfire from any American home, and they take gunfire from a house on, I forget what street, but they're forming up to deploy. Like 6 Americans start shooting at them. They surround the house, they rush the house, kill the inhabitants, burn it to the ground. That's British policy. If they take fire from any American home, they're going to torch it because it's rebel, and that's their policy. So that's actually a good clue when we're studying the British approach in the battle through town here. So they're burning down Danbury. The Americans start to mass south at Bethel, which still is in Danbury at this point in time, but decide just that they don't have enough troops to do anything. They showed up pretty tired. It was raining, so a lot of them have problems with their muskets being a little too damp and stuff like that. So they wait overnight as Danbury burns in the distance. There's nothing they can do. American troops that are coming from the north are massing on the hills outside of Danbury. The 50 Continental troops that were left there go to the outskirts of town just to, again, keep an eye on things and to see what the British are doing. What are they doing? They're burning Danbury and burning the supplies there. There's nothing the Americans can do. So the next day, the British are marching off. They get going a little late because Tryon's taking a sweet time in the morning. I don't know if he's getting breakfast or something. And they're also leaving the Americans guessing. The Americans don't know where the British are going to march to next. There's a thought that they're going to head directly west towards the Hudson River, so there could be threats out that way. Worcester suspects they're just going to head back south to ships in the harbor, but they can't move yet because what if they got a 50-50 chance of picking the right direction that the British are going to march. So they're holding. But as the British march out, here's the unsung heroes again. The New Yorkers, I think, are opposing them to the west. It makes sense the way they would come to Danbury, the George Washington Highway kind of stuff. The British mentioned that Americans are ripping up bridges before them along Myrie Brook and stuff like that. Who's going to do that? Probably those New Yorkers. They're taking pot shots at these British troops from behind trees and stone walls, slowing them down. The British are getting a little jumpy as they're advancing as well. There's a great story of when they basically, and we're almost getting to that point now, when they get to Ridgebury at the intersection, and this is the critical point. Are they going to keep going west or south? One of the colonial houses that was standing at the time, I guess some of the children and one of a woman in the house kind of peeked out to see these troops marching by, and they were immediately shot at. I mean, these British were pretty jumpy of taking fire from Americans from houses at this point, apparently. So nobody got hurt there, and that house didn't get burnt down. But in any case, basically, the British turned south. Now it's clear they're not going to be marching to New York, not the Hudson. Worcester was right, they're going south. This is when Worcester makes the command decision. And I should also state, I'm kind of blasting through a lot of stuff here. We should mention, right, General Benedict Arnold is on scene. He's been at Bethel. We have General Silliman of the Connecticut Militia. We have General Worcester, command of all Connecticut Militia. After probably a little arguing about who's in command, it's basically decided Worcester is. But they split the 800 American troops there into two divisions. So you'll hear me speaking of Worcester's division. You'll hear me speaking about Arnold's division as we move forward. Just as the British are marching in two divisions with Agnew and Erskine's divisions. So this is kind of how they march on. So with it pretty certain they're going to head south, Worcester does an overland, kind of over the river through the woods kind of route. It was really hard to try to reconstruct that. A lot of those roads don't even exist today, but he's basically marching in and coming in en route towards, I guess it's what, South Bigelow Hollow Road and the high school down there, or the elementary school. And Arnold's and Silliman's division, 400, are marching directly to Ridgefield here, to the village. New Yorkers are, and maybe some others from Danbury are harassing the British rear. The British aren't really taking any serious, they aren't writing about any serious fighting at this point. So everyone's on the move. And the British are, again, not just encountering pot shots, random skirmishing, probably fighting in their rear with the New Yorkers. They stop for a much needed break and lunch, but boy, did they wait a while. I don't know how long it takes to butcher a cow and to get it ready to cook and to consume, but by all accounts, they were slaughtering cattle right there they took from Americans and, feeding their troops. It's hard to estimate, but they must have been there an hour and a half or some change. I mean, they were that secure that they weren't moving as fast as they probably should have. They didn't realize Worcester's troops are bearing down on them. They didn't realize Arnold's troops were getting in front of them. Tryon was still sort of comfortable thinking that this is loyalist country, and maybe there's more support than that he thought. So in any case, while the British are waiting near Mammonasco Lake in Eating, a detachment goes and burns down Keeler's grist mill. There's a bunch of flour and supplies in there that they claimed were American, or the Americans would use them, so they destroyed the whole structure. Could have been just personal, local kind of conflicts being settled. It was the loyalists that tracked down that mill and burnt it down. A lot of those loyalists were from the area and town, and I wonder if they, some personal scores were being settled, who knows. We know where that site is. A landholder was kind enough years ago to give permission, and I hope they still do, and we'd be looking for that for evidence of British troops. No fighting, but this is one of those contributing properties that we'd find buttons and dropped equipment and maybe nails and stuff. And then at this point, Worcester's division is pretty close, and the British don't realize that. They're pretty much wrapping up their lunch, getting ready to move again. So here we enter basically what you all are probably familiar with the first engagement in town. I'd argue there's engagements earlier, but they weren't as, to the scale of this. The New Yorkers were opening fire on the British since Ridgebury. But basically, if you can make out our map here, here's the lake, here is North Salem, and here is that Bigelow, or North or South Bigelow, I'm sorry, Tacora Lane, so you get a sense of where you are if you're from the area. And as the British start moving out, Worcester's troops are moving in and starting to, get into attack position in a column and probably moving relatively quickly up the slope. Agnew's brigade, Erskine's brigade, I believe it is Agnew's in the front, Erskine in the rear. Erskine was the more veteran of all the officers there. You probably have some of your best troops in the rear. That's maybe why he was there. And again, 750 infantry each, 3 cannons each. The cannons are pretty mobile. They're not big, heavy weapons. They're actually pretty light. They're mobile, akin to like crew service machine guns. Like it takes like 6 guys to move the thing with a few hand spikes, get it in position, get it loaded, fire, move. The things are, they call them grasshoppers. They were so light, and when they'd fire, they'd jump from the recoil, I guess. So really fascinating. These weapons were designed right in time for the American War and really only used during the American Revolution. They're kind of interesting. So that cannonball is fired from one of those grasshoppers. They march south on North Salem Road, past Barlow Mountain Road, basically Worcester's division near the lake, and they overrun maybe around 2 o'clock, we guess, the rear of, I guess that would be Erskine's brigade. It seems like they're already on the move, but when they move in, according to this account here, from London, not New London, this is from overseas, the Gazetteer, if I'm even saying it right, and the New Daily Advertiser, Americans took 40 prisoners belonging to Tryon's army and a number of wagons and horses. They basically took the entire wagon train of Erskine's brigade. which might not seem like a lot. I mean, there were some soldiers taken, probably guards, there was POWs, probably wounded were in those wagons as well, British wounded. But they took a lot of ammunition. They took all the ammunition for the guns for that brigade. So now all 6 guns only have ammo in the wagon trade of Agnew's brigade, not to mention what they have on them. That's a pretty serious score for the Americans, I'd say. So they got prisoners, they got ammunition, took a pretty big hit on that brigade. And then after, I don't know how long they linger to secure those prisoners, or did they just keep moving on and detach a company to do it? They immediately give pursuit to the rear of the British column. So what's one of the mysteries here, where exactly it took place, but if you're familiar with the area, boy, it's pretty unimpacted. There's a lot of open space, big fields, old colonial houses. The challenge will be distinguishing battle-related objects from colonial farming and just colonial objects, right? But there's no colonists that are, running around with, before the war with, military buttons and stuff like that. So hopefully you'll find British buttons, equipment, stuff dropped off the wagons. We'll have to keep an eye on all sorts of metal and hardware. Who knows, what's there? And where it took place, that's the other mystery. We might find the British encampment for lunch. We will possibly find the approach of Worcester's troops if they're dropping stuff up the slope. We'll find exactly where they overran the wagons. I guarantee you, a few months from now when we have another talk, we'll have all sorts of interesting finds to share. Second engagement you're familiar with, Worcester keeps moving on, and they press the rear guard. They're hoping to overwhelm Erskine's division. Maybe they have a false sense of kind of security after the easy kind of combat they had, relatively taking the wagon train. Erskine knows that he lost his wagons, and he sets up a good number of his troops basically on the slope just after the intersection or the confluence of both of these roads, Takora and South North Salem at this point. By all accounts, the British may have even occupied or rebuilt some breastworks Americans before them had built in anticipation. They were going to possibly make a little stand there, but decided bad idea and maybe broke them down and ran away. So the British may have had some slight breastworks. They had the high ground. They brought up all 3 of their cannons, and Loyalist Brown Corps was probably on the flanks on the higher ground. So they were waiting for them. The Americans come around the corner, and we're still trying to figure out line of sight. How much would they have seen even with no trees back then? But they would have been taking fire, whether they're in a column formation or if they deployed into line at least 600 yards out. Those guns that's easy range. They'd be throwing in those 4-pound balls like at Keeler Tavern. As they get closer, they transition to grape shot. Bunch of steel balls like the size of golf balls, just blasted downrange, big buckshot loads. As they get point blank, like 150 yards, they're switching to canister, which is just a bunch of musket balls. It just cuts people down. Not to mention when you're in about 100 yards, that's small arms fire. All the infantry is going to start opening up on the Americans. They walked into like a wall of lead as they came down the road. They start taking all sorts of fire. So with that said, and there's some ammunition up there, dramatic. Worcester's horse apparently shot out from under him, big target, a lot of lead flying anyway. He, by all accounts, is moving on foot and rallying the men, follow me, boys, don't worry about these stray shots, let's go for that first cannon. And basically ordering his men to charge the closest gun. I don't know if that helps us figure out arrangement of forces or not. But at that point, he's mortally wounded. Who knows if it's musket fire, it's claimed that it came from the direction of the Loyalists. There's so much canister shot being fired right now. I mean, canister are musket balls, so I mean, we don't have the ball that killed him. We don't know what hit him, but something hit him, and he went down. And at that point, the attack just breaks down by all accounts, and the division falls back. Here's a big mystery. We just don't know what happens to Worcester's division after this. A lot of speculation. Seems after Worcester falls, there's maybe so many other officers on the field. There might be disagreements in command. I mean, there's Continentals, there's New Yorkers, there's Connecticut guys. That could be something to it. Maybe they decided it was just too hard of a target and they redeployed to try to get to Ridgefield. The New Yorkers could have, went around to the north somehow. We just don't know, and we're trying to figure that one out. Maybe they just held and didn't do anything. It's to be determined. So in any case, the third engagement, right, that we're all so familiar with perhaps, we drive through it maybe every day here if you're coming through town. Here is one of our battlefield maps that we use to reconstruct positions and such, and we try to put in where waterways were, original roads and orchards and such. This is LiDAR technology, basically like satellite imaging of the landscape, trying to do a three-dimensional reconstruction. We try to play with the landscape as much as possible because the land dictates everything, dictates the battle, dictates troop movements, dictates where we want to look today, right? So in any case, 2 p.m., Arnold is arriving at Ridgefield. There's already 100+ troops probably waiting for him, maybe on the site near the old Episcopal church that was here. Congregational was further up. I was confused. But in any case, the churches were the rallying points for other militia. Think about it. Steeple, the tallest building in town, public buildings, and actually the church that was standing here was housing military supplies as well, gunpowder, flints, and lead shot, who knows, all kinds of stuff. So Arnold shows up, and at that point he makes the decision to barricade this very strategic point in town a little further north that we're familiar with. High rocks on one side, Stebbin House on another, big valley below, orchards and wetlands on either side. It was probably the best place to make a stand with 500 or so Americans now, facing 750 plus. 750 if they have one division. So in any case, a barricade, carts, wagons, earth, extended from Stebbin's house to a high ledge of rocks. Beyond that, north of the rocks is an old orchard. This is the American battle line, more or less stretched out from the base of High Ridge. The New Yorkers are probably kind of covering where New Road is today. That thing went in like 20th century, I think. But in any case, the main body was on Main Street in the barricade area. And then more troops were further, what would that be, east, kind of where the Historical Society is, up on the big kind of hill. So that was the American battle line. Attackers, now think about it, if you're the British, and this is why the Americans were so successful, I argue, in holding off the Brits for so long, they got to go down into a valley, they're already in musket range, and they got to go up like pretty steep cliffs that by all accounts are pretty rocky. If you fan out on either side of the cliffs, you're going to hit wetlands on one side, orchards on another, with another high cliff that Americans are defending. It's pretty defendable. And then fighting your way up, there's a barricade that Americans are holding. So unless you can really shoot them all down with accurate musket fire, it's going to take a bayonet charge. It's a tough position. I think they picked a great spot, clearly. So in any case, the attack begins with a 6-gun carronade. All 6 of those guns, the 2 divisions, are all brought forward. The hope is just to blast away through the Americans. Maybe they'll run with that many guns going off. They opened fire, I forget, like a half hour at least of just cannonading, and then they realized it wasn't having any effect on the barricade or American troops. A half hour. That's a lot of cannon fire. That's a lot of projectiles that I'm sure a number have been dug up over the years, but I bet there's still a number of them out there, even with the impacts to the land. One thing we're finding in any of these battlefields, no matter how impacted the land looks, there's always evidence of the battle. There's always a little bit that survives. So even if you think I don't have much of a yard, I got like a postage stamp out front, we'd still like to metal detect that, because you never know. We've seen crazy things over the years. So with that said, there's first-hand accounts. The battle basically, they first began by cannonade from 6 field pieces. That's a Connecticut commander. Next, the British try testing the flanks. So they send heavy flanking companies to try to go around this position. They meet the New Yorkers who beat them back. That would be Brown's Loyalist Corps. A section of the British hit the 9th Connecticut over in the orchard and the high grounds by the Historical Society, and they're both pushed back. So standard tactics. They're just trying to push and probe and see where American weaknesses are. Apparently there isn't any on this battle line. So then the old frontal assault begins, basically. So not answering their purposes, they send flanking parties to flank us. They were received warmly by our posts for a while. I mean, American militia doesn't always have a good reputation. They have a stereotype of running at the first shot. But these Connecticut guys and New Yorkers, they held their ground. They didn't run. This is a long battle, and we'll see ultimately how the American line was broken. Agnew's brigade launches an all-out assault on the entire American line. It said they come in on a full column of 750 troops, but then fanned out to a broad front. So they came in as a column deployed into battle line and pushed up against the entire American front, trying to push their way through. And again, they advanced with a broad front. This is one of the Connecticut soldiers. Upon this, a hot fire ensued from both sides, which continued with great fury for about a half hour more. a half hour of combat. That must have felt like 24, like a lifetime for these soldiers trying to hold the line against the British, following a half-hour cannonade. I can't even imagine how many projectiles are probably still embedded, even over in any of these houses that are built upon the land. Like, it's just, I mean, earth is never fully removed during the construction process. Maybe in modern times, it gets moved around. So even if a musket ball is bulldozed and moved over here but still found on your property, it still tells us a lot. It gives us a lot of context, right? So don't discount your own property. Let us discount it for you. Here's the painting that just recently, 2019, was inspired by the events. Dale Gallen, one of the country's noted military artists. I'm a fan of Don Troiani. You'll see a lot of his art in my work here, and he's actually also advising Ridgefield on material culture. But in any case, yeah, I think any Ridgefielder would probably love to have that painting hanging in their house somewhere. It's especially closer you are. Now, Brown's Loyalist Corps, maybe it's because they are Americans, maybe they are colonists. They probably fought in colonial warfare in the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War, like the Americans on the battle line here. I suspect they fought a little differently than British troops. They knew how to fight in open order, and there's probably a reason they're using them for flankers. Maybe they're disposable to the British, who knows? But in any case, the British, the Brown's Loyalist Corps somehow keeps forcing its way through the orchard on the far left, somehow pushes their way through or pushes the New Yorkers back, get atop the cliffs on the left side of the American line, and then are able to enfilade, fire down the flank of the American line. They're up on the heights, now with a clear view of the entire American line, and that nobody's going to stand at that point when you're starting to get shot at, from above, from the left. But those that were at the barricade were holding the barricade. By all accounts, the British were getting pretty low on ammo, and I discuss back and forth with Keith Jones all the time, like how low were they? Were they out of ammo? Were they not? And this and that. But I mean, from my research, and they really say they were down to like the last cartridges, which is why they ordered a bayonet charge. They should have done it a half hour earlier if that's the plan was, but they shoot up all their cartridge boxes, like whatever 20, 30 rounds they have, and they're forced to push on the Americans. But it's happening just as the Loyalists get up on the cliffs and start flanking the Americans. It all happens at once. This is the point where Arnold's horse is shot out and pins him on the ground. This is the point where Arnold pulls out a couple pistols and dispatches one of the Loyalists that charges up on him. This is when he somehow gets on another horse and probably retreats down to where we're standing today, one of these churches. This is where the American line folds and collapses. By all accounts, they retreat to the east, most of them. When they're turned on this side, I mean, I'm sure people retreat down Main Street, but most of them are fleeing down through the orchard, and that's where General Gold Silliman is killed in action down there, trying to rally troops as the line breaks and folds. It makes sense, too. I think of the entire battle line, the 9th Connecticut had the strongest position just near the Historical Society, up on that big cliff where there's like an office building today. That was like a fortress. So they were the anchor of the east flank, and they were the last to retreat. So in any case, the British completely outflanked and encircled Arnold's left wing. That's the clue right there. That's the evidence right there. And anybody that studies this stuff, I'd love to get us all together someday with all the primary accounts and just game it out. Because I'm not right. I'm wrong all the time. Kevin's wrong all the time. The best historians and researchers know that you're never right. Because you got to keep your eyes open. You can't be, too committed to any one scenario at any time. So I'd love to game this out, but to me, that's what it sounds like. Crowds them closely together and compelled them to retreat in confusion. So the Loyalists were able to turn the flank as you got a bunch of British climbing up over the rocks with bayonets. And then by all accounts, it's some pretty close quarter fighting around the Stebbins house, which is being used as a field hospital too. Americans are being wounded Americans are being bayoneted, being killed. Men are being wounded. Americans are shooting back and dropping British on the spot right there. There was a lot of close quarter fighting around Stebbins as the line kind of crumbled. So there's my Americans retreating. There's the Loyalists shooting at them. And now additional engagements. We're on the battlefield. This whole place is a battlefield. And we just don't know enough about it. And every time we detect or have the opportunity to check out a property, and we just recently did a few weeks ago, like not too far from here, we get artifacts. I bet there's stuff all up and down the street. in all of these yards. Hopefully landholders would, allow us to check them out. The same goes for High Ridge. The same goes for East Ridge. Is that what that is? It's because in any case, the Americans now retreat basically down to the churches. Those are the rally points. Pension reports are saying that, I was wounded, I was loaded up on a horse and, basically at the church and got out of there. So they're retreating pretty quickly. All these Americans came in, a lot of these Americans came in on horseback. They were mounted, dismounted, and fought on foot. It's almost like, driving up in all your automobiles, the local militia, getting out and parking them somewhere and fighting. So they're all retreating back to their horses, trying to get out of here as the British are moving in. And the British are bringing up the second division now. Basically, Agnew's division was fighting at the third engagement. They're the ones that ran out of ammo, got shot up pretty good, but took the position. So now the second division comes in, Erskine's. They're the ones that are going to clear town because the first division is licking their wounds. They're out of ammo. They're bayoneting Americans. They're taking care of their people at the Stebbins house. The second division moves in. They break into three major parties. One that's going to go down High. One's going to go down Main Street. One's going to go down East Ridge, and they just are clearing the town of Americans. Basically, Americans are making stands here and there. There's skirmishing taking place, and clearly something was going on at Keeler, right? So here's a veteran, Levi Bradley, or actually a descendant of a veteran. He said, Arnold's men getting scattered. My grandfather and some others ran to an old barn for shelter. The British, seeing them, turned their field pieces that way and making the clapboards fly, with probably grape shot and stuff like that. My grandfather got out and ran to an apple tree. He found a man standing behind it, and whether he made a man made room for him or he pushed him a little bit, a cannonball killed that guy. Just boom, hit him in the end. So can you imagine? I don't know if that was a random shot or these gunners are so good they can pick off an American at like 100 yards with a cannon. Probably they can do that. So in any case, there's some heavy fighting going on around town here. My Americans running away again. American troops make a stand near Keeler's Tavern and the end of High Ridge. There's kind of a higher hill at the end of the High Ridge area and probably in between as well based on some of our kind of preliminary work. This is the British Royal Engineer who has a great account of the battle, who did a lot of maps of the battle. He's one of the best sources for the British perspective. And he said after being in the village a little while, the rebels again drew up and came up to a rising ground above the village. So again, we think it's kind of High Ridge area, one of our mysteries. And upon which Sir William Erskine, again, Erskine's brigade, they're the ones clearing town, made a disposition to surround them. However, by different companies not advancing at the same time, we only dispersed them and drove them off. So like the last stand, the last fighting of the day, major stuff was probably right behind us somewhere on High Ridge. So I was canvassing the area today, getting an idea of who lives where. If anybody's from that area, come speak to me. I'd love to talk to you and to see what's going on up that way. What's more of a mystery to me is East Ridge. There's like less and less instances of what's happening over there. There's an account of a British soldier being found mortally wounded against a boulder over on that side of town, and he's cared for in a local house, dies a little while, a few days later or something like that. It's tough to say. So we're trying to piece it through pension records, through artifacts. Honestly, the artifacts are going to be the next big narrative that tell us more about the battle. We could get lucky and find some more historical stuff, maybe not. Historical accounts, that is. Okay, so with that said, finally, I'm glad I'm in a captive audience that loves this stuff because this is a long presentation, right? But the British encampment, some of us might not know so much about, but southern end of town. It's a nice flat area almost on the town line that years later was used as a racetrack, housing development now. But that's where the British decided to more or less camp. Robinson said, we lay near the village at night, 4 battalions in line, 2 on each wing. I mean, he lays out like their camp streets, basically. He tells us, I mean, if we could survey enough areas there, I'm sure we could find specific regimental buttons almost in the exact kind of layout he's discussing. I tried to kind of guess it out there with the Loyalists in front, but who knows. Connecticut Current reports that fighting in Ridgefield continued and loose scattering fire until nighttime. That's not, some people don't realize that. There was still small combat action or Americans getting up close and taking a shot and running away, kind of guerrilla warfare stuff. The British established at least 2 outposts, probably 3, which wasn't really, I think, known beforehand. And here is what a Ridgefield resident says. He said the British encampment at Ridgefield was half or 3/4 of a mile from the village on an elevated plain or ridge of land on the, look at this stuff, right? On the east of the adjacent of Norwalk Road. They had several outposts or picket guards, one on the high hill a 1/4 of a mile west of village, up that way where the fighting ended kind of stuff. One east of that where Colonel Goldfeld, kind of near the Historical Society. There was a British outpost out there. I mean, they had enough troops spread out that if the Americans decided to make a night assault or move in troops, they'd be alerted, right? And then the last, then they probably had sentries right on Main Street somewhere. So that's interesting to think about. Okay, so battlefield survey. This is where I may tell you what to expect, our technology, that kind of stuff. Hopefully I'm not like way over time here. I probably am. But in any case, at this point, it's to identify the sites. We've done the bulk of the research. Yeah, we're continue as much as we can to do historical research, but we are on the ground finding evidence of the fighting, the boundaries, that kind of stuff. Landholder permissions are key. That's it. Hopefully you'll help us out. I see some friendly faces in the crowd already. Thank you for helping us in the past and helping us in the future. We're going to be looking for those core areas, contributing properties, seeing if the areas that we suspected that there's going to be evidence of fighting, does it actually exist? Sure, we can think, we believe it happened by the historical record, but is there enough intact land? Will we get enough permissions? Will we find artifacts? I'm optimistic. Identify boundaries. That's really what the Park Service wants. If you think of any classic military map of troop positions in like a Gettysburg or Lexington and Concord, that's kind of what they want to see. Where did the New York units come from? What was the extent of the battlefield? Where did troops move to burn Keeler's mill down? That kind of stuff. They want to know boundaries. They don't want every single artifact. We're never going to get every single artifact. But if you did, what battlefield is there left to preserve, right? If you've taken every artifact, right? So it's to get enough of a sample to realize these places contribute to this battlefield. Perform other research, fill out a report, but this is going to be a multi-year phase. As long as the funding continues and the federal government doesn't collapse or anything like that, this battlefield is so massive, almost every engagement could, basically be a grant in itself. There's just so much to study here. It's incredible. I tell you that from experience. I'm working on finishing a King Philip's War site in Greenfield, Massachusetts, Turners Falls, Massachusetts. It's 8 miles long. It's kind of similar to this. Both sides had guns, probably 2,000 troops on the battlefield, Native American and English colonists, and it took us 3 grants over 6-8 years to finish the thing. I'm sure we'll move faster here, but I mean, there's a potential for long-term research. And on the left is what people expect for archaeology, long trenches and screening of dirt, but you'll never find the battlefield that way. You'll burn through your budget, you'll get nowhere looking for lead shot, broken metal artifacts. It's impossible. It has to be done with remote sensing. Once you get onto the target, then you can try this kind of stuff. We're going to love to try to do any sort of shovel test pits if we get permission, because we're only really asking for metal detecting. It's a whole nother ask to have us actually move dirt in your property. But we would love to do that whenever the British are stationary, when they're having lunch in Mammonasco, when they're encamped later on. If we find a field hospital, that's the kind of anywhere around Stebbins' house. How else are you going to find gun flints? How else are you going to find kaolin pipes and things like that, right? So that's what we hope for. On the right is the battlefield survey stuff we do. This is actually that Turners Falls battlefield, Connecticut River, 3 different towns. I don't know. I don't know how many hundreds of permissions over 3 years we needed to get. But you do it with detecting. And here's one of our detectorists actually on Main Street here at a landowner's house who is in the crowd tonight. Thank you again. And there's not a lot of impact to your property. It's we pinpoint the target. We take a little plug of grass. We actually just flip it open. We don't even remove the plug. When you flip it back, it actually grows back pretty quickly for some reason. We remove the artifact, GPS it, kind of do a brief description, and then take it to Ridgefield or to Yukon for lab work to figure out what we have. You won't even know we're there. If anything, we're aerating your yard. I think you'll enjoy it. Or if you're ready to plant some flowers, there's going to be plenty of holes popped all over the place. So we're there to help. If you have an area that you need clearing, we'll probably clear it for you, because you can't swing a metal detector with brush and prickers and stuff like that. So if you have garden space you don't want us to go near, that's fine. Obviously, you need to tell us about your property and the land history, and it helps us kind of target this stuff. So, and there's Dr. McBride, GPSing, doing paperwork for individual musket balls found on the battlefield up in Greenfield, Massachusetts. So, what are we going to be using here? Since we're not doing really moving of earth, it's all metal detecting. Honestly, we call it remote sensing. It sounds very technical, but it's metal detecting. We have some really skilled metal detectorists. It is rocket science. I mean, unless you have an interest in it and some time to put forth learning it, it's really tough to just take out of the box and get going. I've been at it for years. I'm getting better at it. We have a couple crew members that are just magicians. Been doing it for like 30 years, so they know what they're doing. Question, yeah. Great question, and honestly, we don't have to really wait to the end if you have technical questions as we're moving along, but for the best machine, and he has one of the better ones there, he can get, and we do it in centimeters, so maybe a foot or so. It's not that deep, maybe 20 some odd centimeters, but you'd be surprised. Most of these musket balls, I don't know how a cannonball hits the ground, but most of the musket balls don't go that deep, unless they've been turned over by plows or the earth's been moved. We find musket balls sometimes like just under the grass, like a couple centimeters. You'll just never know. So it ranges. And honestly, I've never uncovered ordnance before, cannonballs, so it'll be very interesting to hear. I was just talking to my colleague when we were walking down Main Street, the governor's mansion over there, when they were paving the road, initially in the 20s or something like that, they were laying down cement slabs, right? For one, that's cool. I think cement is better than asphalt. And they found like 2 or 3 cannonballs just in that stretch there when they were doing that back in the 20s. And who knows where they are now, but you can almost see those balls walking up towards Keeler Tavern, right? Getting their range or something like that. LiDAR, again, is like, using satellite kind of lasers and bouncing off the ground and magic to basically to get a sense of what the land looks like without vegetation and anything. Here you can see stone walls, roads. I mean, that's, you saw some LiDAR in some of my mapping. GIS is exactly how we, global information systems, is how we track and actually catalog these artifacts. Everything's on a big conceptual grid, and we use GPS and latitude, longitude to, within centimeters, to pinpoint the artifact on your property. And it's in real time. We upload this stuff. Stephen can be sitting in his office and check on us at the end of the day and see what kind of stuff we found. It's really incredible how the technology has advanced just in like the 10 years I've been doing this kind of stuff. Question in the far back, and then another fellow.
Do you know how much area 2000 occupied?
That's a good question, and not offhand. I think they'd have pretty tight company streets at this point. Each regiment is like, I think they have like 150 or so hand-picked men. It's pretty tight. I mean, obviously they fit themselves on that kind of plateau outside of town. And then throughout the battlefield, like their formations change. They march in columns, they fan out when they stop. There's flankers deployed on the sides. This is the kind of stuff we're going to figure out with the archaeology. We just don't know how far from the main road American and British fighting is happening. So it's probably much larger than we ever expected. A question closer?
I just wanted to use drones at all.
Oh yeah, drones. We've been playing with drones lately back in Heritage. I just heard today there's all kinds of new technology that's way above my head, but the drones might be used for this kind of LiDAR work. It's all way, it's way above my pay grade, the stuff they're doing, but they're using even thermal imaging somehow to see changes on elevation. I have no idea, but yes. I'm sure we'll use drones. I mean, it's rapidly evolving. With that said, remote sensing GPR, it's really seems very interesting. It can only be used in limited, kind of areas. We push it along on a sled like this, sometimes drag it, it has to go flat on the ground or as flat as possible to get these readings of any sort of anomalies in the earth, basically. If there was a post mold, if there was a burial, if there was a hearth or something dug, it would show up in these GPR, ground penetrating radar surveys. Where would we like to do it the most? Again, where there's fixed positions people have stopped. Mamanasco Lake, the encampment on the south end of town. If there was any real intact areas along the second, third, or first engagement, maybe, but the combat's not going to, impact the ground. You have to have digging, you have to have movement, you have to have a hearth, something being dug, bodies being buried. With that said, the British bury their dead where they die, right? The British leave all men behind, right? That's how their army works. And here, if anybody passed away overnight in that encampment, they got to be buried close by. So that might be something that GPR would be useful for. Anyway, that's one of the interesting tools in the kit. And then last but not least, and again, this is also in targeted areas, and we've done a little bit of it recently, shovel test pits, unit excavations if we think we're in a good location or if the landholder's really enthusiastic and friendly. And recently we were just given full access to a property and we moved a lot of earth. Didn't get anything war related, but found some Native American objects too, which is kind of cool. That's another point too. Ridgefield Historical Society, your town in general, will learn a lot more about your historical landscape in this research, because if we find colonial buttons, if we find even stuff in like the 1870s, 1920s, we generally keep it because it gives you an idea about land use. But if it's not, that we can't keep everything. So if it's not really war-related or doesn't give us great insight into the town, it all goes back to the landholder. And you'll get all the coinage, all whatever, the gold rings, all kinds of... If it's not, war-related, we have no... And you laugh, but we finally found a gold ring on somebody's property up in Greenfield. The lady was very thrilled, turned it over to her. May have even been an ancestor of hers. So, you lost your keys, we'll find them. Right? So, in any case, this is the kind of stuff that we're doing, but primarily it's going to be metal detecting. The rest of it helps us with mapping and with cataloging, and then we have special tools for special instances. A lot of stuff we're capable of. Archaeology's come a long way over the years. With that said, here's a couple approaches just to wrap it up. Kevin always wants me to make this point that this kind of research has been around for ages, kind of spearheaded during with Doug Scott at the Battle of Little Bighorn years ago, maybe the 80s or something. There's big prairie fires, burnt everything down on the ground, and then lo and behold, they're seeing brass cartridges and artifacts all over the place there. So they're going around and mapping and trying to figure out the battlefield. Did incredible research. A lot of that was a bit of this gross analysis. That's finding all the artifacts, all the musket balls in Ridgefield. We can put a big circle around it and ebb and flow, and we can find skirmishes. Voila, we have a boundary. That is interesting. But I feel we have learned you can do a lot more with more of this dynamic pattern analysis, which Doug also did at Little Bighorn. He had brass cartridges, right? So he was using firing pins. He had rifled guns, so projectiles that could actually do forensics matching like rifling to the bullets. It was crazy stuff. We're doing similar stuff in the 17th century and 18th century with ammunition that's unique and this and that and patterns. But what we try to find out, it's not only enough to find out that there's lead all over Ridgefield, but what can we tell about the first engagement? Can we see the advance of Worcester's troops? Can we see the scattering of British forces? Can we see where maybe wagons were taken because there's broken stuff or bits of this and that? Like, who knows, right? That's like the stuff we speculate about. And all these movements I discussed in the third engagement, will we see any of that on the battlefield? That's dynamic spatial analysis. Like, can you see movements? Can you see specific actions? Can you even track down regimental actions? And we should be able to do a lot of that. So it's interesting. It's a large survey, right? It's a huge place. Here's some artifacts found not too far from here by one of our former volunteers, now soon-to-be employee, a loyalist button, like 60-something caliber shot, pewter shot, which is probably Americans. They like to melt down like pewter, mix it with lead to stretch the lead supply kind of stuff. The British aren't doing that kind of stuff. Like an American artillery button. I don't know if you can make out the flag and the artillery piece, incredibly rare stuff. Like cufflinks that are probably British in nature. And that's just sampling a few things here and there. So I can't wait till we get on site, closer to a major engagement. It's going to be buckets of artifacts. And of course, there's Keeler Tavern. Go check it out as well. That's an example of that 4-pound shot from the grasshoppers that they were able to move around pretty rapidly on the battlefield. Americans had no artillery, as far as we know. Can't figure that out. I mean, they didn't. They were kind of en route. They're used on the next day of the battle. But we could be surprised. You never know what you find out in these surveys. Where are we going to be looking? There's Main Street. Oh, there's High Ridge. Oh, there's East Ridge. The whole town, right? Like, if we could have permission, we'll take it. There's British all over the place here. There's Americans all over the place here. The whole town's a battlefield, which is pretty impressive to think about. Battlefield Ridgefield. So with that said, here's the wrap up. Last slide. We can talk about questions. Y'all can hit the road or whatever. It's been a pleasure, but here's the takeaway. Like, it's serious. Battlefields are always more complex. No matter how much historical research you do, no matter how close you think you are to the truth, you're not even there. These battlefields are complex. There's so much not written down that you are only going to find out by doing the archaeology. So that's exciting. Make no assumptions. Once again, I'm never going to assume that that piece of property is impacted or destroyed. I'm going to want to survey it, right? And sometimes historical documentation, oral tradition, is inconsistent. Sometimes it's incomplete. Usually it's accurate enough, but there's always more to it. So these are the big takeaways. And with that said, I can open it up to questions. It's been a pleasure coming back and sharing this with you. We're going to have more public talks in the future, and if you see us working in town, stop by and ask what we're up to. Yeah, in the back. Final analysis in the bones found north of here that everyone's aware of and so famous. There is no final analysis. I don't think the remains they have not been returned. Analysis is still ongoing. I don't know if it's ever going to be reconciled. I hate to tell it, to break the news to people, but maybe behind Stebbins' property where those interments were found, there's definitely others. There's a lot of men that died on site there, killed afterwards. The place was used as a field hospital. Stebbins mentions like 18 bodies in his orchard behind him, and those aren't even the ones that were found. So Americans have to be buried somewhere. British have to be buried somewhere. There's no diagnostic anything. There's almost no buttons. The people were buried like in their, basically their skivvies, their underclothes. Like they took, back then, especially military clothes, and the British did this specifically, they would strip them. Like if their own man was shot, like that uniform was almost more valuable than that man. So they took all his equipment. And actually there's returns after the battle of people of returning the uniforms and equipment. I mean, having a new jacket issued to you with a bullet hole in it, right? It's like Russian army today in Ukraine, right? So, but in any case, I don't know if we're ever going to find out. There's ways to get around it, and you can speculate, but there's always a devil's advocate to punch a hole in the theory, I hear, So let's stay tuned. The mysteries of Ridgefield, yeah.
So the woodlot next to Casagma, what has been found there and what's being planned in terms of investigating it?
Nothing as far as I know. We want to investigate it anywhere, as you just pointed out, that seems intact, that seems wooded. Love to check it out. There's enough open space preserved in that Casagmo area, probably by design, probably because it's wetlands, that there's got to be evidence there. So we were working with property owners in the past, and hopefully they'll work with us in the future, but definitely a key property, and anything kind of abutting those areas. I saw a question over here. Yeah.
If someone was able to be buried in the soil around here 248 years ago, would there still be bones? Would you expect that?
Yeah, well, you got like a half dozen in town found north of here. It all depends on soil conditions, but if buried in a sandy bank or something, probably. There was 2 burials found in like the 1860s, 70s, almost 100 years after the fact, in like a sandy hill, kind of way further south on the Salem Road. And like they still had like hair. It was 100 years after the battle, but like the bones were intact. They put them on display somewhere, like in one of these like world fairs or something like that. And they called them Hessians. They thought they were Hessians because of their uniform, but they were British grenadiers. They had big bearskin caps they were buried with, which actually is counterintuitive to what I just said about stripping guys. But maybe they were moving so quickly, it was just like bury, move quick, because they're being attacked by Americans at that point. So there's exceptions to every rule. But I bet state of preservation varies. So, yeah. Questions? Yeah. One in the back, one in the front.
Yeah. Has anyone taken the time to do the research topographically to make a model of Ridgefield of April 27th, 1777, so we know how much farmland was there? I mean, you can still see the North Shore of Long Island from Soundview.
Yeah.
Clear day.
No, that's a great question, and it was a critical part of the research that historians have done before us. Keith Jones worked on a great deal. Here's one of our attempts to do a three-dimensional topographic view with some structures that we believe were there at the time. We have a cartographer working with us, Bill Keegan, that does just magical work and gets right to the nitty-gritty of it. It's very important, clearly, for a lot of reasons, but why is it really important to us as well? After the battle, anybody that suffered any sort of loss to property or whatever petitioned to the General Assembly, and they listed everything they lost. So we really know sometimes like contents of houses and barns, but we know specifically who lost what along the way. And that also tells you if the house was incinerated, there was fighting there because the British took fire from the house or they found military stores. More than likely they took fire, they burnt it down to make an example and move on. They saved any houses of loyalists or Tories. Anybody who comes out, God save the king, like your house is preserved kind of stuff. So yeah, it's really striking to me by reconstructing the town, and we did some of that, we'll be doing more of that. High Ridge, there's a lot of burnt houses up there. And I wonder if those New Yorkers were just barricading every single house along the way, fighting, retreating, slowing down, you know, those Brits, because they burned every single house there practically. And that means they were taking fire, so that indicates heavy combat. So yeah, it's something we're working on, and it would be great it's going to be a great necessary visual model, right, for the report. Ernie, I see something up here.
I heard years ago when they built Sagmo that people were collecting stuff all over the building site. That's 50 years ago or so. Have any of the people who did that service collecting come forward and
Not that I know of. And when they were taking stuff, it seems it was almost like mementos of the house, right? Like, I'm taking that floorboard, I'm grabbing this hinge. And with that said, right, we have the door preserved over at Keeler Tavern. If anyone goes over there, the door of the Stevens property that was struck by musket fire survives. It's pretty cool. And when you look at it, it was hit like not straight on, but kind of at an angle and kind of ripped through it. So somebody had the wherewithal to keep that door as a memento of the battle. But yeah, I mean, I bet there's other. And that's part of it. We have put the word out in the past, like, have you found cannonballs? Have you found artifacts? And it's been productive. We've had several individuals come forward. Oh, I remember my dad, 1950, putting up a garage, and we found a cannonball there. Where is it? Ah, it's gone. But in any way, that's close enough for us. And we'll GPS the property, and that oral tradition is pretty strong. So.
was a candidate for six cannons for
Yeah.
using reenactor data, get an estimate of roughly how
You don't even have to get reenactors. I mean, these are the British, right? It's in their manuals of how many rounds per minute kind of stuff. But I don't recall any historical accounts of finding cannonballs when they're taking it apart. I think it's more like structural kind of stuff. I wonder if people would even know what they're looking at. Cannonballs you can tell, but I mean, it's going to look like a rusty hunk of something. You're going to have to get in the ground. How many people are out there with shovels just digging random holes hoping for a cannonball? I don't know. But that's what we were asking. That's what we put the word out for, and we hope to kind of get some feedback for. But I think like 3 or 4 people have come forward with cannonball sightings. So if you have one or know of one or even heard of one, that's sometimes good enough. Oral tradition is important. So, yeah, sir.
they found an 8-pound cannonball, which was very interesting because it's one of the historical records that there were any 8-pounders around on either side.
Is that the one in the Historical Society? I don't know if... I forget. There's an 8-pounder in there, which doesn't make sense. It could be the same one. But this is a key point. So there's going to be other cannonballs that appear. And there's like an 8-pounder, as the gentleman mentions, like an 18-pounder. Somebody has some brass thing, which could be industrial, could be a relic of the Mexican War. You don't know what people have in their house. And then with Danbury, right, the depot, I mean, stuff are falling off of wagons left and right. Colonists like using cannonballs as endirons in fireplaces sometimes, or like a little anvil or something. So you just don't know why things show up some places. But if it's not a 4-pounder, I'm pretty kind of questioning it, you know. But again, we don't really know everything. We believe the Americans had no artillery. That Colonel Lamb or whoever, Captain Lamb, his guns aren't up until, the next day. He's using those in action. But the British, Robinson mentions, one reason I think the Loyalists were ordered to take those rocks up there. They believed, or maybe they were, the Americans were digging in for gun emplacements up there. So maybe they were hoping Lamb would get his guys up here, and they were starting to build breastworks for cannons. That's interesting to think about. But again, that's not here or there with your question. So yeah, if we'll look at any cannonball, but we're hoping they're 4-pounders. If you got south to Westport, though, boy, all sorts of ordnance was used. So that'd be a different battle. Yeah. Any other thoughts? I mean, happy to talk and also talk after, but thanks. Yeah.
Is it necessary to submit a second land access form if you submit it?
Great question.
Whenever the call first went out?
I really don't think so, but I just think for consistency, if we showed up at your house, we'd just have you sign another one just to have an updated record. And I'm not sure the Park Service even really requires permission forms anymore. They used to, but Ridgefield Historical and Heritage just want to cover all our bases, make sure everyone understands what's going to happen, and just, it's a little contract. We're only looking for battle-related stuff. Anything else you get back, whether you want it or not. It might be a big bag of garbage. We'll dispose of it if you want. I mean, you'd be surprised how much pull tabs, and every time you hit like a soda can with your lawnmower, boom, there's 1 million artifacts for us to find. And there's everybody has 22s and 12-gauge shotguns in their yard, whether you know it or not. Everybody's shooting and drinking around here, everywhere. It's like what you did back in, yeah, so there's a lot of stuff. But the permission form, yeah, we'll probably have you sign another one. And there's some here today. And even if you don't think you're in the project area, we'd still throw a pretty wide net and like to check out some properties kind of, off the beaten path. We just don't know where actions are taking place. We've been really surprised in the past, so no assumptions, yeah. Was there another question? Sorry.
Before you said south of town, how far south are you looking?
More or less right on the border. The British are in Wilton line, I guess it would be, yeah. They're just camped right at the line, more or less. The next day they start marching and start taking more fire. So if you're interested in the whole campaign, there's a few books out there to look at, but the real intensive fighting, even more than Ridgefield, is the next day down in Westport. The British are almost out of ammo. The Americans are now swarming, and there's even more troops on the ground, and there's artillery. The British are really lucky to make it out, and I think I'll make that point, maybe make it my last point. From British accounts themselves, from their own newspapers, they were really critical of Tryon's actions and his strategy. They considered this akin to Lexington and Concord. They write in their own newspapers this was Lexington and Concord all over again. What is this guy thinking? Marching into the depth of rebel country, getting swarmed by the rebel hordes. They almost ran out of ammo. If they didn't get to the cover of their guns waiting for them in the harbor, they would have been cut down. Later, when Arnold turns and becomes the greatest traitor in American history, it's kind of hard rooting for him right now. He's the hero of this battle, but man, he's the biggest traitor ever, right? Well, maybe. And in any case, he said from this experience, if Tryon tarried or waited around a half hour longer, he would have never made it out of Ridgefield. He would have never made it out of Connecticut. So it was that close of a disaster. The British never attempt such a land invasion of New England ever again. A lot of coastal raids, but you just, you take your chances if you're going to, march into Yankee country, because they can, they're mobilized. So in any case, I think Keith Jones's book does a good work, maybe saving the reputation of American militia, or at least Connecticut. They stood their ground against British regulars for a long time here in Ridgefield, and we hope to find evidence of that. So thank you. I'm sure I talked too much, but I'm happy to chat more. I'll turn it over to Stephen if he'd want to. Thanks so much for staying with us.